Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
It's Saturday, the 23rd of November. I'm Ciara Evans, and this was a week that saw farmers hit the streets of Westminster. Ukraine marked 1,000 days of Russia's war. Arrest warrants issued for Israeli PM Netanyahu and tributes to former Deputy PM John Prescott.
Grab a cup of something hot, put up your feet, and get up to speed on the 7 biggest stories of the week. This is the Standout 7 from the Smart 7.
It's news,
but not the news.
This week saw the G20 meeting in Brazil, while in the UK farmers prepared for a Westminster protest. They're unhappy about inheritance tax changes introduced in the latest budget. Previously, farms could be passed down tax-free, but from April 2026, heirs will have to pay 20% on property valued over £1 million, which is still only around half the standard inheritance tax rate. While the changes are only expected to impact around 30% of UK farms, NFU President Tom Bradshaw said the effects are being felt across the farming community.
The industry's feeling betrayed. The very ill-considered actions, the lack of understanding of what this means. When you look at the farms that are producing the country's food, a significant proportion of those are over the £1 million threshold.
Transport Secretary Louise Hyde insisted the changes are fair.
We appreciate how hard farmers work, but these decisions had to be made, and we think they've been made in a fair and proportionate way in order to fund public services.
Tuesday saw tractors take to the streets of Westminster, with about 13,000 of the farming community attending for what was a mostly peaceful protest. Fears that the far right would hijack the event didn't materialise, but there were a number of high-profile attendees, including Nigel Farage and celebrity farmer Jeremy Clarkson. He's never one to shy away about grabbing the mic, and he was particularly annoyed at what he felt was misjudgment by Chancellor Rachel Reeves over targeting larger landowners like himself.
If she wanted to get me and Dyson and all the investment bankers, she could have used the sniper's rifle. What she actually used was a blunderbuss, and she's hit everybody here. Defra knows they've made a mistake. We've now got to convince Rachel Reeves that she's made a mistake.
His criticism of Rachel Reeves may have gone down well with his wellied friends, but Environment Secretary Steve Reid said the government has been clear about its intention in the changes to the tax structure around large farms.
It's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners to pay their fair share, but I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more than they do under the current one.
This week also saw the government unveil a major overhaul in children's social care. It's intended to crack down on what's been called massive profiteering by private companies, sometimes at the expense of councils. Many of the placements that vulnerable children find themselves in have also proven to be substandard. The overhaul will see new powers for Ofsted to fine providers, but it may also involve a cap on how much private providers can charge. The government is also delivering on their manifesto promise to help better track children in care with unique ID numbers and multi-agency safeguarding teams. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson says too many children are being failed by the system.
You have some private providers who are securing 20 to 30% profits. This is off the backs of very vulnerable children who've been through often amongst the most traumatic experiences you can imagine, who've experienced real problems within their families that have got them to that point, and I just think it is completely unacceptable to see that level of profit.
While Prime Minister Keir Starmer is in Brazil for the G20, Deputy PM Angela Rayner stepped up for Prime Minister's question time on Wednesday, but she was facing a new opponent as Kemi Badenoch was equally unavailable. It emerged that she hadn't officially appointed a deputy leader, so Shadow Cabinet Minister Alex Burghart stepped up. His focus was on the sudden rise in inflation in October. After a steady decrease, it jumped by 0.6% to 2.3%, driven by higher energy prices, which may mean the Bank of England will delay further interest rate cuts. Burghart was busy suggesting that the Chancellor's budget was stoking inflation, but Rayner wasn't interested in his point of view.
It was his government that crashed the economy, that saw inflation rise to 1.1%. It was his government that spent the reserves 3 times over. I'll take no lessons from the honourable gentleman.
Last Sunday night saw US President Biden finally authorise Ukraine to use long-range ATACMS missiles for strikes inside Russia, a huge policy shift for the administration. With a range of 190 miles, the use of the missiles has been justified by the presence of North Korean troops fighting alongside Russian troops in the Kursk region. Russia has been launching drone and missile attacks, focusing on key energy infrastructure ahead of winter. President Zelensky welcomed the significant change of US policy in his evening address.
Today, there's a lot of talk in the media about us receiving permission for respective actions. But strikes are not carried out with words. Such things are not announced. Missiles will speak for themselves. They certainly will.
Monday saw day one of the G20 summit in Brazil as leaders from the world's largest economies gathered in Rio de Janeiro. Attendees included US President Joe Biden, Chinese President Xi Jinping and UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, but no Vladimir Putin. Starmer and Jinping met for bilateral talks at the conference in the first meeting between the UK and the Chinese head of state since 2018. The tone was positive, with Xi signalling a willingness to see greater cooperation on trade, clean energy and a commitment to avoid future surprises. Sir Keir was also focused on Ukraine, which was thrust back into the spotlight after Joe Biden's decision to allow long-distance missile strikes on Russian territory. And he said that this is a critical time for Ukraine.
We must double down on our support for Ukraine. Tomorrow is day 1,000 of the conflict. That's 1,000 days of aggression from Russia. So that is my clear message here. It's number one on my agenda.
Russia has been infuriated by the decision, which may well have a significant impact on Putin's plans to strike back at the Ukrainian incursion into Russia's Kursk region. Sergei Markov, former President Putin's spokesperson and director of the Institute of Political Studies, says nothing good can come of the change in policy.
This decision of leaders of United States, Great Britain, France is not step toward nuclear war. It's big jump to the nuclear war, nuclear catastrophe.
Tuesday saw 1,000 days of Russia's war on Ukraine. Ukraine marked the occasion by launching 6 of the long-range ATACMS missiles at a Russian military target just outside the city of Kharkiv. The decision by US President Biden to take the shackles of Ukraine's long-range capabilities has caused serious saber-rattling by Russia, with Vladimir Putin announcing a lowering of the threshold for a nuclear response to any conventional attacks on Russia. Ukrainian President Zelensky says for all the talk of peace talks, Putin hasn't changed his mind.
1,000 days, I think it's enough to understand that Putin doesn't want any peace. Even this day, they presented nuclear weapons strategy. Why? They didn't present peace strategy.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer spoke at the G20 and accused Russia of using irresponsible rhetoric.
It's very important that we're steadfast in our support for Ukraine. Russia is the aggressor. Russia has to be the one that makes the move to stop this war. But we must support Ukraine. It's impacting not just Ukraine, it's impacting the rest of the world, including the UK.
Wednesday saw Ukraine launch UK-supplied Storm Shadow missiles at targets in Russia for the first time. This week has seen considerable escalation on both sides, with US President Biden also approving the use of US anti-personnel mines against advancing Russian troops. The US mines are designed to have a limited lifespan but could act as a deterrent against Russian forces. A number of the Storm Shadow missiles appeared to have been fired at a command headquarters which was hosting Russian and North Korean personnel, but Defence Minister John Healey wasn't confirming anything.
We've seen over recent weeks significant change in the action and in the rhetoric on Ukraine. We, as a nation and as a government, are doubling down on our support for Ukraine and determined to do more.
Russia has also been irritated by the escalation, and early on Thursday morning Russia fired a ballistic missile at the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. The IRBM was describing Vladimir Putin as an experimental model, and while that missile type is usually used for nuclear payloads, it was loaded with a non-nuclear hypersonic warhead. The deployment of the missile is highly unusual, so much so that Russia notified the US through nuclear risk reduction channels 30 minutes before the launch. Putin said it's a matter of symmetrical response to attacks on Russia.
On November 19th, 6 operational tactical ATACMS missiles made in the USA were used. And on November 21st, strikes were carried out on military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation in the Bryansk and Kursk regions.
The use of the RBM is seen as a potentially severe escalation, what Ukrainian President Zelensky says is more evidence that Putin has no interest in peace.
Today, our insane neighbour has once again revealed its true nature, its disdain for dignity, freedom, and human life itself. And, most of all, its fear. Fear so overwhelming that it unleashes missile after missile, scouring the globe for more weapons.
US President Joe Biden was busy last weekend touching down in Brazil on Sunday for the G20 summit after a quick stop in Peru for the APEC summit, where he met with China's Xi Jinping for the final time as US leader. Both parties stressed the need for a stable relationship, with President Xi warning against US efforts to contain China. It's a pointed message for US President-elect Donald Trump, who was the centre of discussions this weekend as world leaders tried to anticipate his approach amid fears that Trump diplomacy could lead to chaos. Speaking at the summit, Biden emphasised the importance of maintaining a healthy US-China relationship.
We haven't always agreed, but our conversations have always been candid and always been frank. I think that's vital. These conversations prevent miscalculations, and they ensure the competition between our two countries will not veer into conflict.
With months to go before Donald Trump officially takes over as President of the United States, he's already causing chaos in Washington. Wednesday saw Congress announce a ban on trans women using women's bathrooms on Capitol Hill shortly after the first trans congresswoman was elected. The Ethics Committee also found itself deadlocked over a report into allegations of sexual misconduct by Trump's nominee for Attorney General Matt Gaetz. Billionaires Elon Musk and failed Republican candidate Vivek Ramaswamy are set to run Trump's new Department of Governmental Efficiency, but former US Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, thinks they might do some good.
Musk may have a big role here. It's not entirely clear what Trump is going to do. If we can save a couple $100 billion, I'd be delighted. We can spend it on the defense budget, which desperately needs an increase.
One of Donald Trump's most controversial cabinet picks collapsed on Thursday. Matt Gaetz, the fiery former Florida congressman, withdrew his nomination for Attorney General after more reporting emerged about sexual encounters with underage girls. Trump praised Gaetz for stepping down to avoid being a distraction to his agenda and instead nominated former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. The plot twist is that Gaetz may still be able to return as a congressman in the new term in January. He's not the only nominee in trouble. Fox News host and Defence Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth is under pressure over allegations of sexual assault, which he's been trying to brush off.
Did you sexually assault a woman in Monterey, California? I have, as far as the media is concerned, I'll keep this very simple. The matter was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared, and that's where I'm going to leave it.
Food and aid shortages in Gaza continue to worsen this week, according to World Health Organization spokesperson Margaret Harris. A group of armed men hijacked 98 food and supply trucks last weekend, which has only made things worse. And despite the US ultimatum over a month ago, there is no sign of Israel allowing aid to flow more freely. Local reports suggest that Hamas have formed anti-looting brigades who are now trying to protect aid supplies with no sign of any ceasefire in sight. There is some hope of a breakthrough in Israel's war with Hezbollah, though, as US envoy Amos Hochstein has returned to Beirut. A potential deal could involve a buffer zone in northern Lebanon and would see the deployment of thousands of UN peacekeepers.
We have a real opportunity to bring this conflict to an end. I'm here in Beirut to facilitate that decision, but it's ultimately the decision of the parties. It is now within our grasp.
Any hope for a ceasefire in Gaza receded again on Wednesday as a UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate halt to hostilities was vetoed by the United States. They used their veto because the proposal didn't include any call for the immediate release of the hostages held by Hamas. There was widespread criticism of the move, which was seen as more evidence of Joe Biden's support for Israel. But US Deputy Ambassador to the UN says the release of hostages in a non-negotiable condition and pointed to numerous US proposals that had been rejected.
Despite these proposals from the United States throughout this process, many on this council did not engage seriously on their merits and rather continued to seek a path of discord. In fact, we heard that some desired a US veto rather than of a consensus product.
With food supplies at a critical level, experts are warning that a famine is imminent, and Palestinian ambassador Majed Bamia says that the world seems not to care about his people's plight.
Maybe for some we have the wrong nationality, the wrong faith, but we are humans. Is there a UN charter for Israel that is different from the charter you all have? Do they have the right to kill? And the only right we have is to die.
Thursday saw the International Criminal Court take action on Israel and Hamas. They issued a ruling that there were reasonable grounds for believing that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant bore criminal responsibility for the war crime of starvation and other crimes against humanity. There were also charges laid against Hamas leader Mohammed Deif for the attack on October 7th, but it's believed that he is dead, killed in an Israeli strike. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell announced the charges.
So I take note of the decision of the International Criminal Court to issue arrest warrants from Prime Minister Netanyahu, the former Minister of Defense Mr. Gallant, and the Hamas leaders. This decision is a binding decision.
Netanyahu responded by calling the charges anti-Semitic, and the US President Biden described the situation as outrageous, although states including Canada and Holland have said they will honour the warrants if Netanyahu were to visit their country. Former Tory leadership candidate Tom Tugendhat was unimpressed by the court's findings.
I think what the International Criminal Court is trying to do is to sound balanced. But it's complete rubbish that there is a balance. One is a terrorist organisation that's specific charter says that its purpose is to kill every Jew. The other is the democratically elected head of a state.
Still to come on the Standout 7, Radio 2 Ring the Changes and tributes to a larger-than-life political leader.
Right after this. Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Welcome back.
Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock made a third appearance at the COVID inquiry on Thursday. He was quizzed over the government's handling of issues like the pausing of cancer treatment, the guidance on funerals and the implementation of lockdowns. He insisted that the NHS was not overwhelmed and that the decision to postpone cancer operations was more to do with protecting cancer patients from COVID. He also pointed the finger at Downing Street for PPE shortages and delays in testing. There was also an extraordinary anecdote about how he himself worked as a frontline volunteer.
I spent as much time as I could on the front line, doing night shifts when I could. Because I'm not a trained doctor, my role was to help the nurses to turn patients. And typically these patients needed 2 or 3 people to help turn them. So I was one of the team and I spent the night doing that.
It's that time of year, leaves are falling, a touch of snow, and the radio schedules are getting reshuffled. Radio 2 was first out of the blocks on Tuesday, with Zoe Ball stepping down from breakfast after a 6-year run. She'll be replaced by Scott Mills, who made the jump from Radio 1 to replace Steve Wright 2 years ago, and now takes over the early morning slot. There was a bit of history too in the reshuffle, as Trevor Nelson became the first black presenter on Radio 2 daytimes. Zoe broke her news in person.
After 6 years of fun times alongside you all, I've decided it's time to step away from the early alarm call. And it truly has been such a privilege to share the mornings with you, to go through life's little ups and downs.
Thursday saw the death announced of former Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott. He was 86 years of age and had been suffering ill health since a stroke in 2019. The definition of a larger-than-life character, he became internet famous for punching a protester who threw an egg at him in 2001. But he dreaded that becoming his only legacy. He was a former trade union activist and merchant seaman who became a crucial part of Tony Blair's New Labour. Tributes flooded in from across the political spectrum, from Tony Blair and Gordon Brown to the King and current Labour Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Rest in peace, John.
As one of the key architects of a Labour government, John achieved that rare thing. He changed people's lives and he set the path for us all to follow. And I will always be grateful to him for that.
You've been listening to The Smart 7. We'll be back tomorrow at 7 a.m. Hit that follow button and have a great day. Give us 7 minutes, we'll give you the world.
At Leidos, a brilliant mind is smart, but a brilliant team is smarter. A ship that finds enemy subs is smart, but an autonomous fleet, that's smarter. Defending against cyber attacks? Smart. Stopping attacks before they start? Smarter. And using AI tools is smart, but integrating trusted mission AI into your technology is smarter. We're not just making technology solutions in national security and health. We're making smart smarter. Leidos.